guest. We have different people talking about business analysis here, and if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do so right now and click on the bell so you will be advised every time we have a new video. Today, I have a very good author of several books, Mr. Ryland Leyton with me. Hello, Ryland. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Fabrizio. It's good to see you.
It's a pleasure, a huge pleasure to have you here. My question for you, Ryland, is a question that a lot of people probably is having on their own. Also, my question, is my MVP too big? My minimum viable product too big?
Right. It almost always is. I hate this fact, but I see this a lot. Almost every project I'm involved with, the MVP is too large. And let's get there about what MVP is and what it's not. I think this is an important distinction to make, because most agile practices are set up around getting started and getting your MVP out the door as fast as possible. And that's one reason people like them. You get working software quickly, right? That's the core thing. You do that by constraining your scope and doing the right things first. So the two things I want to distinguish between, and you'll have to excuse me for the busted arm, I can only use one hand to gesture with, so it's a little difficult the way I like to teach and talk. MVP, minimum viable product. Minimum marketable product, MMP, right? Minimum marketable product, MMP. So I'm just going to call that viable versus marketable, okay?
Right.
What's viable? Viable is the point at which you can begin the learning process, or as you and I have talked about a little bit beforehand, coming up with the idea of, could you test a hypothesis, right? Is this thing even valuable? Would someone with continued elaboration find this a valuable product to pay for? Or if you're doing a project inside your company, is it in the right direction? Can we continue to validate that we're building useful software for people because we've got an MVP that we know isn't everything we need? Okay, your MVP should never be everything in the universe that you want. If you are, you're losing out on all the value that you get from agility in the first place, which is adapting to changing conditions and learning as you build, right? So if you're using a 2-week sprint cycle or something like that, you do something, show it to people and learn from it. And it's good when they tell you, what I'd really love is if this also did such and such. Now you know a direction for things people want, as opposed to you guessed at all of that before then because you didn't show it to real end users to find out what they really want. You didn't get feedback. That's the whole point of it. So minimum viable product is the point at which you can begin getting feedback, and it won't be a rock star application at that point. One of my favorite authors, I'm pretty sure it was Eric Ries said this. I could be wrong. I believe the quote is, if you are not ashamed of your minimum viable product, you did too much work. You should be ashamed of it, is how I take it. Why should you be ashamed? Because you would never go to market with this, right? Minimum marketable product. I would never market my minimum viable. I just wouldn't expect that it would have enough value in it to do that. But I can learn from it and see if I'm going the right direction. Should I keep spending my resources on this idea? So that's the key distinction I think our conversation may revolve around.
Interesting. And I always thought about an MVP as the cheapest and the simplest way to test an hypothesis and to see if the product can bring value or try some idea. I'm just wondering what differentiates an MVP from a prototype. Because I can build a prototype to test an hypothesis, or I can make some tests. Would they be MVPs as well, or an MVP is something else?
So I think that's a great question. So one of the reasons you and I are talking is we recently published a book between myself and Steve Adolph and Shane Hasty called The Rock Crusher. And one of the things we talk about in it is prototyping. The IIBA, as you know from the BOK, is going to have two kinds of prototyping, disposable and reusable, or expandable, but disposable and non-disposable prototyping. And there's more on that in there if you need it. So let's distinguish a prototype from a proof of concept, right? A proof of concept, let's say I want to know if I can pull data from a number of different sources and integrate them successfully to produce something like a thing I'll want, right? Proof of concept would be I get some samples of data that I could actually export from those three sources, see if they've got common keys or some way to relate the data in a way that is interesting and useful to me. And can I produce a set of data that an end user would say, yeah, that would be useful. That kind of concept, acknowledging it's a snapshot, right? Because now if you can do that, then you're just dealing with the ideas that are not usually a big deal of, all right, now I need to get that data on a consistent basis, and how often do I need to get it, and so on. These are good, these relate, right? So let's take that. You could do that as a disposable prototype in the sense of just give me some Excel files with the data. I'm going to see if I can connect them up and show it to somebody and see if it makes sense. I probably wouldn't ever continue to do that in Excel, right? But the heart of the matter is, can I connect the data points and make it work? I'd call that a mostly disposable prototype, mostly disposable prototype. Maybe the logic, some of the learning I've gotten could be reused, but it shows the idea and a concept and says, yeah, if you kept giving me these data sets, it would be useful, or shows me what isn't. So it's also kind of a minimum viable product in the sense of, if you don't produce something useful out of that data, why would you bother building all of the things necessary to automatically cycle getting that data? That's useless, right? If I can't make the thing I want from the data sets I have, why do I want to get the data sets, right? So that's a great case where that's kind of, in a sense, an MVP, because I can begin the learning process. And as you said, test the hypothesis cheaply. I don't need 20 developers to do that hypothesis test, do I?
No.
Yeah. So that's a great early hypothesis to check. And just to point out to stakeholders and BAs and other agilists who might be listening, the key point of doing something like that in Excel first would also be that now you have a basis to show someone, see, we could go do this thing. We need probably this much funding for a thing that would get us this data on a once-a-day basis and have it ready in the next morning. And we think the project would look like this. But you have a basis to show, here's the value I get from doing this thing. Right? So I think that's the point of it.
Right. And you're mentioning, in this case, an MVP as a disposable prototype or a disposable proof of concept. So we are proving that data is valid, but I could also not make a disposable prototype, but something that I could reuse in the next version of the development and have an evolutionary development of a product. In this case, I have seen some people, and I would like to hear from you. What's your idea about that? So like the first version of this, let's say, prototype is called an MVP version 1. And then they make the MVP version 2 for the second version of it. And then MVP version 3 and so on. And I would like what you think about that. Have you seen this before?
I've seen things like it. I haven't usually seen somebody label successive things as MVP increment something. And that's kind of fine. Because like once you've gotten to MVP, you're past it. Now you're building features, right? Let's talk about that for a second, okay? I just want to point out, let's pretend, would it be okay if we kept the example I was using? It's a pretty common one for me. Get data from a bunch of places, connect it up, make it useful. Okay. What might our next slimmest iteration be? Let's pretend those were manually gathered samples that somebody sent me in Excel, okay? And let's pretend every one of those data sources is different. I got to I have 3 different data sources. I got to talk to 3 different groups to get my data. Let's just pretend. Might be outside the company, might be in, could be anything. Well, my next iteration might be as 3 separate features in whatever way. I will get those and they'll be emailed to me. It's still an Excel process and it's still crappy, right? It's still terrible. But now I'm getting these files on a daily basis from somebody. Some job has been set up somewhere else that my 3 stakeholder partners are sending me these things. That is a valid iteration. Now I've got this data cycling on a daily basis and it's still in Excel, but at least I've got something happening. Independent of that, I could work with developers to create a database app that picks these files up now that they're coming in automatically, and it can use the SQL that I've created or the Excel analysis I've done to build, okay, given that you get these 3 files, here's the analysis you do, here's the data set you produce, and it spits it out somewhere else as a static file, okay? From there, I could maybe make this more an API that creates that data. Maybe it holds that data on a daily basis. There are a lot of directions I could keep going, but I do have something valuable. If somebody wants this data, I at least have it flowing on a daily basis, and a human can do the work of integrating it every day if they had to, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's much more. Let's ask the questions. And I know this is a little rhetorical, but you're the person here with me, so we're going to do this, right?
Yeah.
Assuming the value that I showed from Excel is valuable on a daily basis, am I already at the point of value?
Probably not.
Why not? The data is valuable. Who cares how I got it?
Yeah, probably there are some possible risks that you are holding. You may have corruption of your data. You may lose some data. You are probably spending a lot of money as having someone doing that manually.
That's true.
Yeah, but you are gaining some value.
Well, I have some risks, and let's assume that if the risks are not unreasonable, and it is a process a human can do in, let's say, an hour a day, and this data is valuable enough that it justifies an hour a day of someone's time, and maybe even another 30 minutes of quality checking by another person who would know.
Okay.
I have value already. How much software did I have to write? Very little. How expensive was this compared to standing up a team of developers to do system-to-system file transfer, and let's get it in JSON, and let's import it into a database, and let's stage it, and let's do all the things. I am not saying those things will not be valuable. They are. We don't have an enterprise solution yet, but with what we've already shown in a prototype, we have value. Now we're increasing the value. That's a good agile pattern to follow, is my position.
I'm remembering some situations where I saw analysts afraid of proposing MVPs because they're afraid that those MVPs will be the final product in their organization. Because when people could see that they're solving their problems, let's think about someone here who is just using the end data that you produced. They're not very worried about who is taking all the job to make that happen. And there's a huge backlog of products that they have to build. And someone could say, oh, go to the next product and stop doing this one. And at some point, they are not proposing MVPs anymore. Being afraid of someone don't letting them to invest more on those MVPs.
Everything you just said is, I totally agree with you. And I think this is where you get into the rough side of any IT thing, which is there are very often stakeholders who will look at it and say, but you're already doing it. And this is the question. I'm going to tell you a secret BA thing I've learned. This is one of my little in-house, like kitchen recipe BA things. And I'm going to challenge all of you who listen to this, if you're thinking about it. How often have you heard this phrase yourself? How hard could it be? You're already doing how much harder could it be to just do this other thing? Okay. So do you hear that question often, by the way?
Yes.
How hard?
Yeah. It's so magic. I just click a button, something happens, and I don't have to understand everything behind the box. It's working, or you do the job.
So my kitchen recipe thing at home, and I apply this to myself because sometimes I catch myself doing it with a developer or somebody else. And I've learned it's this. As soon as you or anyone around you says the words, well, how hard could it be? It's, and fill in the blank, I don't care what it is. The answer is, none of you in the conversation know anymore how hard it actually could be, and you're guessing and making assumptions. So stop talking about it other than to write down your assumption and find someone who knows. Because you obviously don't. You're saying, how hard could it be? And I find that keeps us from running down beliefs too far before we actually ask someone who knows, right? Well, how hard could it be to just automate this process and then take it in and do it reliably? Oh, you want it reliable. That's different, right? Now I need error handling. Now I need job logging. Now I need to know, did it succeed? And if so, did it do it well? Now I need to know, was there a bad data or did we miss a file, right? The permutations become larger and more significant because when a human is handling it, you just get those things for free, right? If I'm a person who receives an email or 3 with files and I combine them and I do stuff, well, I'm a self-programming computer, right? I can handle mistakes that occur on the fly. But a computer is not a self-programming computer. So you need to build actual enterprise software. And yes, so many companies get themselves into trouble there. And to put a kind of an end sentence on this, the thing that has to happen then is you need to make sure that you have enlightened leadership who understand if you're going to spend someone's capacity of their life on this file and Excel thing I described, and it's a trivial thing for them, that might be one reasonable choice. You just discovered a great piece of software you don't have to build and you've avoided waste, and now you can spend that money on something else. But don't chip away at everybody's lives by thinking, oh, well, now I've taken an hour and a half of that person's job, right? And well, what's the next time that happens? And it's more if it doesn't happen reliable, if there's file transfer issues or something. The more critical this business capability that we've just come up with out of thin air, right, of merging these files and producing some new fact, the more critical that is to your business, the more you need to make sure that that is automated and handled and reliable, or understand you are dedicating a person to it. And what happens if they, A, leave your company, B, go on vacation, C, how many of those things will they take up? What if they are just sick? What if they win the lottery? You know, what happens? I don't have to worry about those things when I automate something. And that's part of the value I get. It is now much more reliable in that sense. As long as I know it's all reliable enough to automate, right? One of the things we sometimes make mistakes on is automating the wrong thing, but that's a different conversation, right? So you got to be enlightened about it, is how I see it.
So MVP is valuable. MVP can help us to take better decisions and go forward. And even if they are valuable, and they should be, I must understand that that's not the end product. Or if it is, you should be ashamed of yourself because you're not building something simple enough. There's probably another way to build it faster, cheaper, and easier.
Right. Those are the questions we ask. But now we're in a position to answer, or at least ask those questions, because we have something to learn from, right? Imagine if here's the counterpoint. I just want to point this out as the opposite extreme, right? The whole concept of MVP is really there to avoid the scenario I'm about to describe, okay? Think about waterfall software, where we do all of our requirements up front, our business requirements, our functional requirements, then our solution design, then our system requirements, if that's a phase you do, then you do all of your build, then you do all of your QA, all of your deployment, UAT somewhere in here if you need to, and then you are released and live. And it turns out that little thing we figured out in the first place with that Excel file and the 3 things, nobody did that up front. Someone just said, I know I need this. These are the facts I need, and this is where you get them from. And you were wrong. Giant expense, great if it worked, valueless if it didn't, if you were wrong, right? But I could do this much of this work and understand I don't have the finished product yet, but I've also only spent this much money, right? I've proven the concept and I've proven value. I have, let's call it proof of value, right? Because our hypothesis was, for a very small amount of money, will this data be valuable? I've got these sources, they're repeatable when I want them to be. I do the merge, I show it to somebody, they said, oh yeah, I would love to have this on a daily basis. Great. If they had said, no, you're missing these things, well, at least now I know, and I can go iterate my MVP because I discovered my hypothesis did not prove there's things missing, right?
Our episode is kind of long, but I want to share an idea with you because it's good. And so, as you said, if I'm having a traditional project, it may take too much time to validate some hypotheses. And sometimes people start with an hypothesis that they don't realize it's an hypothesis. I mean, they are assuming something, they have some assumptions that they take as true. Let's say that I'm there in your city and I decide that it's a good idea to sell lasagnas in Dallas. Because people of Dallas will love my lasagna. My lasagna is so good, everybody likes it here in Brazil. So I'm going to sell lasagna in Dallas. I'm going to build a restaurant, and I'm going to buy the license from to have my restaurant, and I'm going to build a menu and hire some waiters and have all this big building. And when I start selling, I just realized that people hate my lasagnas in Dallas. And I spent so much money. Instead of doing that, I could do an MVP. And my MVP could be, I don't know, just sell lasagnas on the WhatsApp for my friends. And so I can test the assumption that people will like my lasagna and see if people are asking for more lasagnas. And maybe I start with this idea and I realize that people don't like my lasagnas as much they like my pizzas. And so I should do something else, right? And I can pivot my ideas, and that's the idea of having an MVP, very cheap, without building anything.
That's right. That's right. You look at all the hardware and infrastructure and structure you've put around that, all the money you've invested, you're completely sensible. Could you get a group of people, in Dallas who might have a different taste in lasagna, right? Your lasagna may be fantastic in Brazil, but the palate, the flavors people expect, it's just different regionally, right? There's a lot of food that applies to. So yeah, you start with some friendly people here. Like I would happily have some lasagna if you're in town. I love lasagna. Okay.
We can try that in the next in the next episode. Right.
But then you could iterate this, right? Like, okay, it worked with a friendly audience. Maybe you try a pop-up restaurant. Like you're going to do all that stuff, but you're going to do it one day. Famous lasagna chef Fabrizio Laguna, I'm sure I said that wrong, but is in Dallas for one day only, pre-sell tickets, and see how it goes, right? It's a pop-up restaurant. You've had very little investment. It's more than you would do with the friends, but it's less than you need to do to go a permanent restaurant. And you can keep working this concept and extending it, right?
That's the idea of an MVP. And as smaller I can do to test my hypothesis, as cheaper it is, probably better. Right. Thank you very much. I will add your LinkedIn. So for someone who is looking for Ryland Leyton on LinkedIn, his link is on the description. For his books, you can buy the Rock Crusher is the last one, but also the business analysts, agile business analysts, right?
Kind of what started it all. So the agile business analyst moving from waterfall to agile.
Perfect.
It was the thing I wrote when I was doing, after I'd done it myself and was talking to people about it again and again and again. I said, I think I need to put this in a book. The conversations I'm having are, too long. They're way longer than people ask me things. They said it's a hallway conversation. I'm like, that's an afternoon. I'm just going to start it there. So there's that. Yeah. And the Eventbrite link, which is where I tend to do most of my speaking, though I'm doing a lot more now with people who host podcasts, and I'm really finding it a lot of fun. So.
Perfect. Right. Thank you very much for coming.
It's been a pleasure. I'll see you again sometime.